Is this really about enforcing the law? Or is it about who the law chooses to catch? That is the question dominating Kenya's political conversation after the dramatic arrest of Member of Parliament Kaguchia by DCI officers. While the government maintains that the arrest followed allegedly divisive and inflammatory remarks, the opposition is telling Kenyans that this case is much bigger than one politician. According to them, it is now a test of whether the law in Kenya is applied equally, or selectively depending on one's political side. At the center of the debate is not just what Kaguchia allegedly said. Very few people are defending inflammatory or divisive statements. In fact, the Constitution and several laws prohibit speech that can incite hatred or threaten national cohesion. If authorities believe an offense has been committed, investigations and legal processes are expected to follow. However, the opposition argues that the real issue is consistency. According to opposition leaders, several politicians allied to the Kenya Kwanza administration have, in the past, made remarks that critics also described as divisive or inflammatory. Yet, they say those politicians were never arrested or subjected to similar treatment.
Nisema ya kwamba Duale amesema mambo baya zaidi kuliko haya. Hassan Omar amefanya mambo zaidi, amesema maneno baya zaidi kuliko haya. Ndio hii maneno yaendelee na yaende sabamba na sheria ifanyike. Mheshimiwa Duale pia akamatwe. Subaru zimuendee pale Afya House. Hassan Omar aendewe pale UDA House. Waletwe hapa, watu wapelekwe kotini, ndio hata Kenya ionekane kuna haki. Hilo inaendelea sasa sio haki. Hakuna sheria inawahusu DCI hapa. Kama kuna chochote ni NCIC. Na mimi nikiangalia hayo maneno yote ni maneno ya kawaida. Kwa hivyo, ndio sheria iweze kufanyika. Ifanyike kwa kila mtu na haki itendeke kwa kila mtu.
This is where the political argument becomes more complicated. The opposition is not merely questioning the arrest itself. They are questioning the order in which justice appears to operate. Their argument is straightforward. If the government genuinely intends to fight hate speech and divisive politics, then the law should begin with everyone equally. They argue that if another public official made similar remarks earlier and no action was taken, then arresting Kaguchia first creates the impression that the law is responding more to political affiliation than to the alleged offense. One of the names repeatedly mentioned by opposition leaders is Cabinet Secretary Aden Duale. They claim that some of his previous political remarks resemble the kind of statements now being used to justify Kaguchia's arrest. Whether the two situations are legally identical would ultimately depend on investigators and the courts, but politically the comparison has already become one of the biggest talking points. That comparison is now placing Interior CS Kipchumba Murkomen under intense political pressure. As the cabinet secretary responsible for internal security, opposition leaders accuse his ministry of allowing selective enforcement of the law. They argue that Kenyans are beginning to see two different standards of justice, one for government allies and another for critics of the government.
Na ninasema kwa rais na Murkomen, hii tabia kutumia idara za usalama kuweza kufanya siasa haitawezekana.
Tunataka Murkomen na Inspector General waeleze wa Kenya, serikali ya Kenya imebadilisha uniform ya polisi, maana kama polisi wanakuja wakiwa hooded, vile tu tuliona pale Orkalau, ni kusema uniform ya polisi imebadilishwa na Wakenya hawana habari.
The government, on the other hand, is likely to maintain that every case is investigated on its own facts and evidence, and that political comparisons should not interfere with criminal investigations. Another issue that has generated public discussion is the manner in which the arrest was carried out. Videos circulating online appear to show some officers involved in the operation wearing hooded jackets or concealing parts of their identities. For many Kenyans, this has raised fresh questions. If police officers are carrying out a lawful arrest, why would some conceal their identities? Supporters of the operation may argue that officers sometimes use protective clothing or conceal their identities for operational and security reasons, especially where there is a risk of confrontation. Critics, however, say that visible identification promotes accountability and public confidence. When officers cannot easily be identified, it becomes harder for citizens to distinguish legitimate law enforcement from abuse of power. This concern goes beyond politics. It touches on the relationship between citizens and the institutions that enforce the law. Perhaps the biggest danger for the Kenya Kwanza administration is not necessarily the arrest itself. It is the perception that could emerge from it. In politics, perception often becomes as powerful as reality. If a significant number of Kenyans begin believing that government supporters are protected while opposition figures are pursued more aggressively, that perception alone can weaken public confidence in law enforcement institutions, even if authorities insist every action is based strictly on evidence. The principle that no one is above the law is widely accepted across the political divide. But that principle carries an equally important companion. No one should also be below the protection of the law. Justice earns public trust not only by punishing wrongdoing but also by demonstrating that similar cases receive similar treatment regardless of political affiliation. Ultimately, Kaguchia's legal responsibility, if any, will be determined through the justice system, not through political speeches or social media debates. At the same time, the broader political debate about equal enforcement of the law is unlikely to disappear soon. As both sides continue presenting their arguments, many Kenyans will be watching closely to see whether future investigations reflect the same standards across the political spectrum. Do you believe the arrest of Kaguchia demonstrates equal enforcement of the law, or does it raise legitimate concerns about selective justice? Share your thoughts in the comments below.